crashed, I burned, I didn't understand what was going on to me. I went out into the field looking at experts, you know, how to help me, what was going on. You know, you get a lot of finger in the air stuff, you know, a lot of coaches and stuff talking about burnout, but without looking into research about, you know, what's the data behind what's driving these things, you know, how important is energy, you know, what are the right intervention tools, but no one could give me that message. But I instinctively felt, you know, this was something to do with the physical thing. So I was trained, I physically got better, that helped my energy. And now the research that I'm conducting as part of master's degree and now PhD is that energy and burnout are fundamentally the same thing. So energy is what we're going to be looking at today. And I'm interested really to get your views on what you think burnout is. So if you don't mind just putting into chat a few ideas about what you think burnout is. What we're going to look at now is what the experts say burnout is. But for me, you know, back in those days, it was a crash. It was a complete implosion of, you know, I would say, you know, energy, but there was more to it than that. Any ideas about what, you know, what you've experienced, you know, yourself or in your organisation or people that you've seen would be useful to get your impression of what burnout is for you, in, you know, and what you've experienced. This is what the experts say. Well, I say the experts, Slee and Jackson, 96, 2011 and 2014, all talked about this being the fundamental area that they look at in burnout. So you're looking at three lines really. So they talk about energy and mismanagement, but they were quite specific that it's not just, physical energy. They're talking about mental, physical and emotional energy. So there's three areas: mental, physical and emotional. So I'd make a note of that if you're here to make notes. Slee and Jackson look at a crash and a depletion of energy, mentally, physically and emotionally. They also talk about being distant from your job. You know, remember the Stevenson Farmer report, and then Deloitte came on, I think it's 2020, and they started talking about presenteeism. So this dives into a second area of burnout. So you've got the energy depletion in three areas of energy: mental, physical, emotional. And then you've got presenteeism, or what they call it, distancing from your job. Third is professional efficacy. This professional efficacy is effectively where people lose their purpose. Have you ever been in a job and someone's negative all the time? They're sniping at the company. I don't like being there, you know. Yeah, they might just be really negative, but they also may be suffering from burnout. So we'll come back to some of your definitions. It'll be interesting to look at them, you know, and also look at what your definition is against what the experts say it is. And maybe there's some similarities there. But for me, a takeaway from this session can be this. These three areas is how you can start to look at burnout for yourself or in your organisation. If you're working with mental health first aiders or something like that to help psychological safety, benchmark those three things. Are people exhibiting one, two, or three of these symptoms? Because if they are, that could be a warning sign for burnout. So that would be my takeaway from this. And looking at energy mismanagement leads me into the work that we do with Tony Schwartz and Jim Lower. So they talk about an energy management system, you know, where we fluctuate between different energy zones in a day. And they say that being careful with how we manage our energy, a little bit like Clover said, you know, she's feeling really good because she's gone off and done some stuff in the morning, you know, to make her, she's maybe not feeling like the positive, but she's feeling that great energy in her body, you know, is massively important to us managing our performance at work, in the workplace. So don't mind if you just, again, have a little look at those boxes and see which box let's say, which box would you say that you're in the most in a day? You know, it could be the green, it could be the sort of the mauve colour, or the red, or the blue. But often we'll be in one or two boxes more than any others. So if you don't mind just dropping into chat for me, you know, a box that you think that you're in more often than not, and I'll just pick up on, you know, on one or two bits there. And just whilst you're dropping into chat, which box that you're in more often than not, it's important to know that the work that Tony Schwartz did, he talked about this is the management of energy, the vertical line, high or low energy, But he also talks about energy zone work being also a management of negative and positive mindset. So, and then this work was done in 1994. So even then they were talking about mental, emotional and physical management of energy is key to performance. Let me just have a little look at the chat for a second. Blue for a while, but I can't sustain it. That's interesting. Green on a good day, dark red, high. High positive, but work with others. All right, great. I'm just going to ask, Claire, do you mind just unmuting for a second and explain blue for a while, but can't sustain it? I'm interested in that comment.
Hopefully my broadband holds up because it's a bit
dodgy.
at the moment.
Perfectly, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I sort of try and do some mindfulness and try and keep relaxed and just let it wash over me, and then something will happen. And we've gone through quite a major reorganisation, got new managers, new hierarchy, and then I'll just get cross and anxious and hopeless and fed up.
Yeah.
And then I'll try and get myself back into the blue square again because being in the red isn't healthy for me.
No, of course not. So you're saying you're in blue and red a lot, are you?
Yes.
Yeah. What about green? Are you there at all? Do you feel in a day?
Occasionally, when I get to when I'm doing something that I'm really passionate about, and being able to do it in the way I believe it should be, for the benefit of our members, yeah, I can go. I am in there, but unfortunately, with all the changes that's been going on, that's not as much as I would like it to be.
Yeah, interesting. That's yeah, very interesting comments. Thanks, Claire. And the reason I picked up on that is because often people think they should be in this green zone a lot. So this green zone is what Tony Schwartz and Jim Lord talk about as the performance zone. And at work, I think that there's certainly there has been a culture of having to be in the green zone, a lot, performing, to high intensities for long periods. But what's known from their research is that if you do operate in the performance zone, the green zone quite a lot, then you're more likely actually to get into the red zone or this mauve zone, into what they will call the survival zone. What Laura and Schwartz talk about very critically is you must oscillate between performance and recovery in a similar way to an athlete would do. If you want to get more green performance, and that's the reason I picked up with what you said there, Claire, if you want to get more green performance, there has to be a drive towards it. So there has to be a structure in place, or an energy management structure in place, so that you're able to get into the green zone more often. And that's often about structuring your day so that you can get into that zone, so that you do have factored in recovery, so that you are doing tasks and managing your day's energy performance a little bit like Clover at the start, so that you've got an abundance of energy to move through the day. What they talk about is the optimum time in this zone is between 90 and 120 minutes only, and then 15 to 20 minutes in the recovery zone. So they say if you're in the green zone for any longer than that, your green zone is going to shrink, it's going to get a lot less. And if it shrinks and gets a lot less, you're going to drop into the survival zone. And if you start going into the survival zone too long, you're going to oscillate between the green and the mauve colour. And if that starts to happen, the next zone is burnout. But Claire, you make a really good point. I'm going to come on to that on the next slide. The takeaway from this is that if you're going to manage energy for yourself or in your workplace, start to factor in constant renewal of energy, small but frequent breaks. And breaks mean actually breaking away from your computer, getting away, completely distressing, having something to eat but don't look at your phone. But it has to be structured and it has to be in place. We did some work with a company recently who factored in short breaks of recovery, and their well-being scores went a lot higher and their performance levels went a lot higher. So, I mean, that's a big takeaway from that section. Moving quickly into this bell curve, my third message is that a lot of people talk about performance management and overload of stress. That's burnout. You're overwhelmed, pressure of work. I agree. Of course I agree, because that's what the research says. But what the research also says is that if we're not oscillating, we're not moving between the energy zones, then we're going to have problems on the opposite side as well. So if you look at this picture, you've got here this thing called bore out. Strange word, but effectively it's burnout. But it's burnout on the opposite side. So somebody who operates in the blue zone, the recovery zone too much, is also going to suffer from burnout. And that was a bit of a shock to me. The research shows this, that people who underperform at work or go into a job where they're just coasting have got as big, if not bigger, chance of burnout. And the reason is, look at this here, the strain zone. On the right side, this is your overload, your overstressed zone. It's quite big. But on the left side, the strain zone is less. And what that means is that if you spend too much time in the blue, you're doing a job that you're just coasting through, you're not pushing your performance, you're staying in that zone, then you've got less capacity to deal with strain. So the strain zone is smaller. It means that you're more likely to get stressed and burned out if you get stressed, if you get an overload. So that's one key message: is look out for yourself or for colleagues who are just going through the motions of work, because that's a telltale sign and a warning symbol that that burnout could be on the cards. But also those people in the blue zone do get very stressed as well, because what happens is their capacity to perform starts to diminish. And exactly like Claire said, which is why I picked up on it, once your capacity to perform diminishes and you're in the blue zone a lot, then you'll start to oscillate between the blue zone and the burnout zone. So the message for me here is that performance management is key, but it's performance management towards optimal performance. Push yourself to succeed, push your staff to hit their targets. Too much coasting, too much time in the recovery is bad. Obviously, too much time in the overload is bad. Okay, we are now going to be moving into our next section. So that's my piece over. Hope you've enjoyed the 3 takeaways. Over to my colleague now, Andrew MacDonald, and he's going to be looking at personal management of stress using technology.
Thanks, John, and good morning, everybody. The background to this is I've been an executive coach since 2005. Prior to that, I had a 20-year career in the banking industry. My focus has been to try and develop measures, physiological measures that go parallel to the psychometric tools and the cognitive tools which are widely available in the market and used by human resources. The company is called PQ Elbra. We have an exclusive research contract with Loughborough University, the #1 sports science university for the last 5 years in the world. They're embedded in Team GB right now. And what we've created is a concept called PQ, the physiological quotient, which is to sit alongside IQ and EQ and create ultimately a 3Q view of the world. And if John, you could click on the next slide, just using John's slide. Our starting point in this context of burnout is to show you the classic pressure performance curve, which measures the impact of stress on human physiology and ultimately psychology as well, through increasing pressure. And what you see is performance increases, which mirrors the bell curve that John showed you there and the 4-box, to a point of optimal performance. And the inflection point shows as fatigue. Now, fatigue is the physiological surplus of stress over recovery over a sustained period. And the consequence of that, progressively, that imbalance is what leads to what we are seeing as symptomatic mental ill health and burnout in the workplace. So I noted on one of the chats, someone was talking about preventative involvement. Well, physiology gives you the flashing amber light before you go to red. Your body gives measurable signals of stress and recovery balance, and that's what we measure. So if we just click onto the next slide. What we do is we use a device. I'll just show you it. We wear it on we get our clients to wear it just under their heart for 7 days, for 24 hours a day, and we measure their stress and recovery through a working week and a weekend. Weekend is important. I'll come back to that. And this is some of the raw data that we gather. So we don't share this, but I want to show you 2 executives doing the same job for the same company on the same day. And executive 1 on the top, the red bars are stress, measurable physiological stress. That is the dominance of the sympathetic nervous system. That's when you are flooded with cortisol and adrenaline and your heart rate is rising. The blue bars are exercise. We can distinguish between the 2. And then finally, on the executive 2, the green bars are recovery. And that is the dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system, which we can measure with this heart rate variability. This is a measurable phenomenon. That is when your heart rate is dropping and you're in a calming phase. What you can see in these 2 executives doing the same thing on the same day, sitting next to each other, is one is sympathetically dominant the whole day. They did not have 1 minute of recovery. Now, we'll come on to self-reporting. They didn't think that. They thought they were generating recovery, but actually, physiologically, they were stressed every minute of the day. Executive 2 had quite high levels of recovery. Now, recovery, John mentioned that, can come from a number of forms, but depending on your profile, it needs to be quite rigorous to generate the parasympathetic response if you are biased towards stress. And what we've discovered from our measuring, we've been measuring people for more than a year now, executives, is that there are 3 components to our physiological makeup. One is genetic, just as some people can run fast and jump high, we all have a predisposition towards stress and recovery. We can't do anything about that. That's endogenous. The second element is exogenous, and that is the prevailing culture we operate in. That is the stressor environment. That is your workplace, that is your family life, that is the environment you live in, the country you live in, a pandemic, whatever. That is the exogenous factor. That's something that corporates need to be thinking about because they have enormous control of that exogenous stressor to their workers. And that's why well-being is so important. The third element, which is coachable, is the controllable. How do you respond to your genetic inheritance and to the environment you operate in? How do you manage yourselves, which is what John has been talking about. Now that is very important, but unless you measure yourself, you're going to be managing the wrong data. So that's why this profile matters. And if you click on John, the next slide shows you the sleep that these 2 individuals had the following night. In both of these charts, they are unconscious, but executive 1 carries their stress profile in until 4 o'clock in the morning. Their highest stress score in the whole 24 hours when they were unconscious. Now, it's not surprising because their body is used to being stressed. So why would, because they're unconscious, it think, well, there's not a risk around the corner? There's a primordial activity here. Some of it's genetic, some of it's cultural, and some of it's the way that this person manages themselves. But it's way off best. Executive 2 shows an immediate parasympathetic dominance when they're unconscious. They're generating high volumes and high intensity of recovery. Now, for 1 day, does this matter? No. But if you think of that pressure performance curve I showed you earlier, it is clear that executive 1 is at risk of declining down in an accelerated way down that pressure performance curve. That generates an emotional response first, that's measurable. What we see emotionally when people are stressed and suffering from excess stress is their personality often inverts. Extroverts become very subdued and introspective, and extroverts become more blurting and more extreme in their response to environments. This is a physiologically driven phenomenon which becomes an emotional factor, and then eventually you get cognitive dysfunction as well. If you could just move on, John. What we do is we take this data and we generate 8 parameters of measurement. We measure how people start in the day, their capacity, how much stress they carry over from the previous day, and how much their batteries are recharged. We measure 3 measures of performance stress, average levels to give you an idea of what your body will let you carry, peak stress, what your maximum output is, and then activity strain, which is the load, the full volume. And then we measure 3 amounts of recovery, how much daytime recovery you generate, what your sleep quality is, and how much volume of recovery you generate over a 24-hour period. And we have a system where you self-report into a diary over this 1-week period as well. And we can show you, in this chart, it shows the head of a large division of one of our big 4 banks. 2,000 people worked for her, and she is the blue color, her scores. Behind her is a sort of FT pink, that is her leadership team. And she self-reported that she recovered better than anybody in her team, and she carried more stress, and she started the day better than anybody. And when we measured her, the reality was far from that. She was way down. Her team were about 25% inaccurate. She was about 50% inaccurate. She actually had lousy recovery. She started the day in bad shape, and she was consequently very weak in her ability to support performance stress. Bottom line, this technology can confront the narrative you tell yourself and take you to a coachable space where you can start to address your reality, your genetic reality, your environmental reality, and your self-management shortfall. And self-reporting is a very, very, very good way of confronting that. We're finding people are particularly bad at self-reporting daytime recovery. They think that a bit of 15 minutes off is switching off. Well, we've measured people meditating for an hour and they've been stressed the entire hour. Why? Because they've taken their thoughts with them. Now, this is not, you need to be much more active in your recovery than that. 80% of the executives that we measure generate 0 recovery in any of their 3 meal times. Why? Because they're reading screens. They're engaging with people. Extroverts are maybe bossing people about. This is not recovery. This is just another form of stress, and it's measurable. We just click on, John. Oh, the final point on this profile, this is a pre-burnout profile or mid-burnout profile. There's a she's managing herself inaccurately. She's carrying much more stress. There's 0 recovery. And the coda to this story is that she is no longer in the role she was in. She moved to another place. However, just measuring a baseline isn't enough. And what we've developed is a digital platform which is based on a tool used by 550 professional US sports teams to provide individual coaching. The US military, as they try to manage their average veteran length of service from 15 years, which is too low, they're trying to take it up. So they're using this tool. And also the US Olympic team. And what we do is we load in all the information we can. So there are diaries of self-reporting around burnout, family, network. You can measure everything and it's all aggregated in. You can upload PDFs of previous psychometric profiles. We can take feeds from Apple Watches and Whoops and Aura. And what we're offering people is the capacity to manage their lives with the professionalism that elite athletes do. And why does that matter? Because if you're going to be in that green performance box, you need to know, 1, your baseline, and 2, what you're trying to achieve. And you need to be accurate in your self-reporting, and you need to be working with live data supported by coaches. We also have executives using their personal trainer data as all piled into this. Why does that matter? We were with a group of executives last week. 20% of them were overtraining, and of that, and 30% of them were training at the wrong time of day. If you do it intense exercise that sits in the evening, it is probable your metabolism will be running so that you're carrying stress into sleep until about 2 or 3 in the morning. Simple as that. If you exercise in the morning, you'll probably generate a recovery effect. So what we're trying to do with our technology is say, measure your stress. It's measurable. It's not just a discussion point. It's not just a subjective. And if you are talking subjectively about your stress, recognize that if you're like the people we've measured, you're between 25 and 40% inaccurate. So there's a long way to go before you get right on this. And secondly, on a sustainable basis, there are technologies now available to keep you on the right track and for you to focus. And for a company and an employer, our mantra is trust people to self-manage, but give them the resources to do it. So the manager needs to recognize that every single executive that is who works for them has a PQ profile, and some of them will have unremitting stress during their day. Interestingly, and as a final comment, for people who have very high recovery, they have two challenges. One, they struggle when stress becomes heavy because they're not used to it. And the second thing is that they are typically very poor at empathy. Why? Because they wake up every morning feeling like Roger Federer rather than like the rest of us. And that means that they don't see the same world as everybody else. And maybe our friend who was feeling so fantastic this morning in her allotment early today has a recovery profile which is different to the rest of us who maybe felt more like bears with sore heads when we joined the call. But anyway, there's a lot more here. There's a lot more science. The fundamentals field that we're looking at from a university perspective is executive science to mirror sports science. We're looking to look at the physiology of the workplace. There's an enormous amount that science can add to this debate because there's an awful lot of hack speculation and also too much psychology and not enough physiology. And that's my piece.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and just to reinforce the point that Andrew's made, and the idea with today is that use data to drive your strategy for yourself. You know, had I have had access to Andrew's tools and was able to self-manage and get some data feedback about what was going on for me, and I got into the habit of managing my own energy, then I wouldn't have got burned out.